agenda, so let's get started. I've had a request that everybody try to speak up when they're talking so that the microphones can clearly pick up what you're saying. And so with that out of the way, minutes.
I have a request. I have read the minutes and I think they're fine, but I'm looking through them, I think I make too many motions. And so would somebody else care to make this motion to approve if you agree?
I'll move.
So seconded.
Thank you.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Assuming no discussion. Do we have any members of the public here for comments? Okay, so then item number 3, Ariana, with an update.
Yes, since your April meeting, the Transportation Committee met and they received the quarterly report on the Smart Growth Incentive Program and Active Transportation Grant Program, including the proposed 6-month schedule amendment to the City of Lemon Grove's Main Street Promenade Planning Project, which you saw at your last meeting and then was subsequently approved by the Regional Planning Committee. The Transportation Committee and the board also reviewed the proposed bond issuance, which is currently scheduled to occur this summer. You saw that on your agenda last time as well. The Transportation Committee recommended and the board approved the request by the City of Oceanside to use our commercial paper program. Bless you. Our tip amendment number 11 was a regular quarterly amendment, and that was also reviewed and approved. No significant comments on any of those. And then the board also approved the fiscal year 2015 request for exception by MTS and NCTD. And in addition, the board continued discussions regarding the funding measure and the draft ordinance provisions. And they approved moving forward with placing a funding measure on the November ballot. And that is part of your agenda, toward the end of your agenda today.
Okay, questions? Okay, next we move on to the hotly sought after appointment membership for the subcommittee on the audit.
Right. So this year we're actually moving forward a little bit early. We typically wait until we complete the process for the prior year. So next month we'll be bringing, the auditors will be here and they'll be bringing the final the results of the final FY15 compliance audits, and then we typically ask for this at the same time. But due to some scheduling, I'm going to be going to the GFOA this year, so I'd be cutting down on time. I'm going to be out of the office for a bit, so we wanted to get this process started early. And then if this seems to work this year, then we'll do this in the future. So the subcommittee. The involvement of the subcommittee is typically towards the front end of the audit process. It's reviewing the agreed upon procedures, any changes that we may have, and or are proposing, and then helping structure that so that could be brought before the ITAC as a whole in July. And then the auditors will send out some communication, very minimal, unless the subcommittee requests a little bit more. Usually only through December, and then Sandar works with the auditors to complete the process. So last year we had Brad, Stewart, and Kai, and of course Tracy, on the subcommittee. So we are once again asking for a total of 3 from the ITAC, and Dick did. Even though he's not here today, he did ask to be nominated for the committee. So I need 3 people. I mean, 4. Well, you're 4. You're always on it.
Well, I would. We should all thank Dick. I mean, he's got great expertise in the area, so it's nice that he stepped up. This is probably one of the few things where I have relevant expertise, and would be happy to also participate. So. That's acceptable, then absolutely looking for one other volunteer.
What about Dustin? Dustin, the only reason I'm nagging on you is because I think it's an experience that you might want to have, since you learn from people like him and Dick and Tracy, and it helps you become you know, more aware of when we're talking about these things, if you think you could.
Yeah, that's, I don't have a problem with that.
Okay, great. And this is, we handle this all via email. That typically works out better than trying to schedule in-person meetings.
Do you
Do
need a
we
motion?
Yeah, do we need a
Yeah,
motion?
do we need to vote on this?
Yes.
I would move, well, no, you do it, Carolyn.
Okay, I won't have to say the first 2 words, right? No. I move that we have Tracy, Dick, Stuart, and Dustin on the committee.
I second the motion.
Any further discussion?
I just would like to say that probably for Dick's benefit, we would have nominated him anyway since he wasn't here, right?
Okay. So all in favor of that? Next, we have Michelle is going to talk about our tip amendments.
Good morning. At its May 20th, 2016 meeting, the Sandag Transportation Committee is scheduled to approve amendment number 12 to the 2014 Regional Transportation Improvement Program. The ITOC is asked to review and discuss the projects included in this proposed amendment, focusing their review on the Transnet funded projects. So amendment number 12 to the 2014 RTIP is an administrative modification and is being processed due to time constraints, and is detailed in the discussion section of the report, which begins on page 2. And in attachment 1 on your backup, beginning on page 3, are the changes proposed in this amendment, specifically for those projects funded with Transnet. And as usual, each project includes the Transnet funding at the top, followed by all other funding underneath, a Transnet subtotal, and another subtotal to kind of point out how much Transnet is on each project. And so for you today, there are 2 projects with Transnet funds on them in this amendment, and we're here to discuss. Do you have any questions?
Anybody?
I have just one quick question for Michelle.
Yes.
Do I understand this correctly? This is an administrative change because the Transnet funds involved do not exceed $10 million.
It's actually all funding, so if we're not increasing the project itself by more than $10.
All right. We're only shifting money, we're
10
not
million.
increasing
Yes.
the project.
Yes, so the project cost is, the total project is not.
That makes this just an administrative change. Thank you.
Oh, you better make a motion.
No, this is just
Oh,
discussion.
just motion, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. No further questions. Move on to item 6, also Michelle.
Okay, so this one's a little bit larger. So Sandag, serving as the region's metropolitan planning organization, or MPO, is required by state and federal laws to develop and adopt a regional transportation improvement program, which is a multi-year program for major transportation projects, including the Transnet program and projects, or POP. We are presenting a preliminary draft listing of Transnet-funded projects for the draft 2016 RTIP. Included in your agenda item today is the information about the 2016 RTIP and the upcoming schedule. In attachment 1, beginning on page 3, we have provided a listing of all projects funded with Transnet funds proposed for programming in the 5-year 2016 RTIP, which includes fiscal years 2017 through 2021. Resolutions are due to Sandag by June 24th for the local agency Transnet-funded projects. And for Sandag and Caltrans projects, project changes are dependent upon the approval of the FY 2017 Sandag program budget, which is scheduled to be approved on May 27, 2016. So I know this is a pretty long list of projects, which is why we're bringing this to you today as kind of an initial review, and then we'll be coming back in July for a draft to review the projects again. So if you don't have time to look at all the projects now, definitely take a look at them, and then come the draft in July, we can have further discussion if you like, or I can answer any questions that you might have on this list today. But I'm going to go ahead and keep going on with my presentation, that's okay. So in attachment 2 of your backup, which is shown on page 125, this is a program summary of major projects. Provides a cumulative capacity analysis in regards to the revenue versus program of Transnet Local Streets Improvements, or LSI funds, for the draft 2016 RTIP for all local agencies. And as you can see, most agencies are at a 90% or higher. There is one agency, the county. If you can see the first biennial, the 2 years, they leave a pretty large chunk of money, but they'll be spending that in the next 3 years on larger projects. So. attachment 3, beginning on page 126, this is the program summary of major projects by mode. So this table breaks up all the projects in the RTIP into specific modes, which is dependent on the type of work being done as well. And it shows the breakdown by funding type, which is federal, state, Transnet, and local or private. And we currently have 7 different modes listed here. So the first mode is major multimodal facilities. And this includes projects along major highways that include HOV, direct access ramps, or bus rapid transit. And then also in that category is that border access port. And just for further clarification, this includes the 905 freeway, the South Bay BRT, and the State Route 11 projects. And we're presenting this item for you today for your review and or discussion. So the entire draft 2016 RTIP, including its air quality conformity analysis and draft air quality conformity redetermination of the San Diego Forward, the regional plan, will be presented to you at your July meeting for further review and discussion. And the final 2016 RTIP will be presented to you for discussion and an additional opportunity for comment in September. And pending the Transportation Committee's recommendation, the Board of Directors will be requested to adopt the final 2016 RTIP and make its air quality conformity determination at its September 23rd meeting.
Okay, my first question is just for information because I don't know what it means. I noticed that you have 5 projects where they are using toll credits, and I don't know what a toll credit is, how it's generated, or which projects are eligible. So I'd like to have some information.
Sure. So toll credits are basically it's funding that the state has been collecting, and they can use to match federal funds. And it's basically just a match for federal funds, and it's not towards the project cost. So as you see, it's in the project description. It's not included in the cost because it's just kind of a match that's there, but not presented toward the total cost of the project. So it allows them to spend federal funds without using a local fund source to match them.
Okay, and it's not from our projects then?
Well, just to add to what Michelle said, essentially what the federal government has done is give a credit, that's why it's called a toll credit, for those private investments that toll road investors have made on the state highway system.
Okay.
So here in California, there's a number of toll roads. And so the value of that investment, the engineering, the right-of-way, the construction, all of that value of all of the toll roads across the state generate a bottom line value. And so across the state, all agencies that obligate federal funds can use these toll credits to match those federal funds.
And how is it divided up? Because obviously it's a
It's on a
finite
first
sum.
come, first served.
Interesting. Okay. My second question is this. Let's see which page. Okay, I'm looking on page 80, which is the Coastal Rail Trail Bicycle Project. And then I saw, you guys were nice enough, whoever sends out these newspaper reports, it looks like, I guess it's Cardiff by the Sea residents changed their mind on where they wanted the trail to go, which means, according to this report, whether it's correct or not, Mug Stoll from Sandag is not optimistic about whether they can go through it this time or not with the project if there's a design change. So my question is there any recourse for the, what was $178,000 already expended on planning if this city blocks what was approved at one time? I mean, I worry about this as a taxpayer. Somebody goes ahead, the council, and they approve something. Then they disapprove it and there's a loss of money and time. So who's responsible?
Well, I think right now we're working with the city to try to figure out an alternate alignment so that we can use some of the expense and the effort that has been made on the original alignment towards the alternate alignment. So we continue to work with the city. Ultimately, we do want to build a coastal rail trail somewhere along the coast. So I think we'll try to maximize the investment that has been made. On occasion, we do need to take a step back, but that's the ultimate goal.
But when we increase the time, we increase the dollars. So according to Muggs, he doesn't know if he can meet this timeline.
Right, so sometimes you have to do additional studies that do take longer, and so there's additional staff cost or consultant cost, so, yeah.
Okay, my question is, what didn't the citizens like? Why are they objecting to this alignment?
It's been, in my understanding of what's happening in this area of density, there's two factions. There's one that there was a yes on the rail trail and there was a no on the rail trail. And then one of the council members, used to support the rail trail basically east of the rail alignment flipped. And so they changed their mind now and now want it on the other side. It is something that has us concerned as well. We're going to be taking an item to our transportation committee this month to have this discussion, because obviously, yes, work with the council proceeded along their preferred alignment, only to find, later on that it's changed, and so obviously there are some costs. I mean, some of it's they're not entirely lost, because obviously, some of the environmental work that we're doing to get information, could be applicable. But yes, some of the early design stuff may not be relevant anymore. So it is an issue that's coming up, and we're gonna talk about it with our transportation committee.
Okay, just from my
We can convey this as well.
Yeah, then I'm concerned as a member, I don't know how the rest of the panel feels, but I'm concerned that when you have increased costs due to a city council changing their vote, who's responsible? And it sounds like if something isn't done, it'll be the taxpayer, which I wouldn't approve of. Thank you.
Two questions. One basic and one perhaps a concept question. Basic question. I see that our most recent RTIP is 2014, and I should know this, but do we update this thing every 2 years?
Right.
So this is the 2016. Okay, that was the first question. Thank you, Michelle. The second question, assuming that everything on the 2014 RTIP was legal, because it's been approved and we're working through it, do we in any way identify the new projects that have been added to the 2014? Or is that a huge project, or is this indicated?
We don't have it indicated on here. We do keep track of the new projects that are added to the 2016.
Well, I mean, this is a huge thing to look through and to come up with any succinct comments about specific projects.
We can provide you a list of the new projects.
Well, does the committee agree that that would be useful to see what new work is? How big is it? How many?
57 projects.
How many?
57.
57 projects. Is that readily? Is the committee interested in that?
I think that'd be use interest for sure.
Just to give some context, the total number of projects on the RTIP is
649.
How many?
649.
Well, it's much easier to look at 57, just glance through them to make certain that they're all appropriately within the requirements of the bond measure of Transnet. I would like to see it. If we're not tasking
No,
staff
I can run a
too
report
much.
for that, yeah, it's not a problem.
If the committee agrees.
For me, I would say this, I trust the Sandex staff to make sure that
So-
all of the projects are within the Transnet
Yep.
ordinance, because that would be a horrible thing if it weren't, and I know these guys are really good at what they do.
I agree. No, I trust them also, but it would be easier to look at 57,
Yeah.
glance at 57 new projects than 650, many of which have already been approved and are in progress perhaps.
Okay, yeah, it's not like before.
Yeah, I think we've done that for you before.
I think you
Yeah.
did. All right, thank you. That was my only comment.
If there are no others, I just had a question on table 2. I'm curious if you happen to know, as we get into the back end of the 5-year period, Carlsbad, La Mesa, and Solana Beach, on a projected basis, dip under that 90% level, and is there any story behind that?
Well, I did cannot double check because the threshold for the ITOP is 75%.
Right.
But I can definitely, I do know that the city of La Mesa does basically a 2-year CIP, so the next 3 years is not as forward-looking.
Yeah, gotcha.
For Carlsbad and Solana Beach, I can definitely check in on that.
How about the county?
Well, the county,
They're still at 91%.
yeah, by the time you get out to the full,
Thank
the
you.
full 5-year period,
Thank
they're up
you.
to 92%.
Don't we have 2 letters that you guys put out here, one from Carlsbad and the other from
Yes.
Encinitas?
Yeah, so that was from the 2014, so what they have currently programmed, is they do have letters for that. But
Okay.
for the next 5 years, with their updated programming, they've changed.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I don't know if it's relevant or not. I was just curious, where do park and rides fall in? Who handles those? Do they get included in park tip
Currently do
ever?
not have any parking rides.
But in the past, have they been part of?
They have been, yeah, because if they do have to do some air quality conformity on them,
Yeah,
so they have been in the past.
I think Caltrans in the past has.
So if they were to be
Right now,
proposed, it would fall into this in the future?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. So next we have a review of the draft annual report.
Yes.
Ariana, will you lead that discussion?
The ordinance requires that the ITOC put together an annual report for presentation to the board every year. Attachment 1 includes a draft of the proposed 2016 ITOC annual report, and then we're also including a copy of last year's 2015 annual report for reference. And the format is very similar to last year's report. It's a bit shorter, only because you don't have the triennial audit this year to report on. We've included again the section on the local street and road balances. That was a request made by ITOC members during your review of the report a couple of years ago. And then just as a reminder, this question has come up in the past, we print this in-house at a cost of about $1 per copy, and we make about 100 copies, and then it resides on the ITOC website. And today we're asking the ITOC to review and discuss the draft and provide any suggestions for changes that we can come back to your June meeting with for your final acceptance. Or you could take action to approve the report at today's meeting in substantially the same format as you see here, and we can make any, smaller minor changes. And the final report is scheduled for presentation at the June 24th board meeting, where Chair Barnum is scheduled to present that to the board.
So, I generally, I like the format and support kind of mimicking the format we did last year. My main question I have, I was looking through it, was on the local agency road and street balances chart. And it was because I noticed, so last year we showed a remaining unused programming of 103 million or something like that. And this year we show 186 million. It's went up by quite a bit. And then we show the unused programming, 17 out of the 19 agencies went up. Is that, I'm trying to figure out, it doesn't seem to jive unless I'm misunderstanding what I'm reading, which is quite possible. Did we really go up that much, and did all the agencies, am I not comparing apples to apples or something?
No, it should be done. Okay, so it's like City of Escondido. Lisa, do you know?
Which column are you looking at?
So we're looking at the last two.
The last column,
So the
I guess
E.
column
unused?
E on the previous one, and it doesn't have a letter on the new one, but, it's the remaining.
So if you look at both of these. So I can see City of Vista right off the bat, the increase.
Well, 17 of them increased, not, some of them not so much, but, I mean, according to this table.
Well, I mean, it would go up
The
if they.
the cumulative
because
received.
Right, because there's an additional amount that's
Right.
received in the fiscal year, and so.
But it's
then-
but it's the unused portion, so.
Yeah.
That's what, yeah, then maybe that makes sense. I just want to make sure before we publish something that.
No, I think this is just based on actual, received, and dispersed.
Okay.
Yeah. And what I don't know off the top of my head, and I'm not sure if it's, I'm looking to see. Yeah, so this is a blend, okay. So that's why our numbers might look a little off to you, is because this isn't pure sales tax. There may be debt in here. There may be, interest earnings. So there's kind of a blend of activity. So instead of just having like a sales tax column, bond proceed column, and then, or other, like we do in the larger report, one of the reports that part of my attachment, it's just all grouped together. And so if we're dispersing, bonds, or we're applying interest earnings, there's, that's gonna change it up a little bit. Interest is gonna increase the overall allocations, even though, it might not be a substantially great amount individually, but between all of them, that's going to increase. And I have what makes up each of these numbers. I have more detail where, so if you want it, I can always provide more detail.
This
Yeah, I
includes
guess-
both bonds and commercial paper, right?
And commercial paper. Mm-hmm.
So, so is this are these both as of a similar date in each year?
As of June 30th,
should be-
2015, and the prior year would have been
So they're
June
the
30th,
same.
2014.
Same snapshot of, okay.
So it's a year ago. Yeah.
Because I was viewing it as Transnet road balances, but, and maybe it's.
Well, it is.
But
It is for the local, so it is their street and road. It's not including the other programs like the major corridor, the EMP, active transportation, the grant programs.
I guess when I was just at first glance of it, it looks like we're saying there was an unused balance last year at year end of 103 million, and then this year we're saying it's 186 million.
Right. Except that the cumulative received also increased as well as the dispersed. So all the numbers increased.
Well, the received increased, and that's the other thing. It looks like we said we went from 476 million raised to 552, so we increased by 76 million in terms of the allocations, but we went up by 83 million in unused.
Right, because there's a blend in here.
There's additional sources.
Yeah, there are
of
additional
revenue.
sources that would then,
Okay.
make that not equate.
Kai, I'm glad I didn't think to compare these two, thank you. I noticed that the whole $80 million is in two organizations. City of San Diego went up 30 million, and the county went up 50 million. Do I have that right? No, the county went up 35, and the City of San Diego went up 30. So it was just those two organizations, and it's an interesting point that Kai raises.
Well, if it's right, it's right. That's fine. That's what I just want to make sure that I was understanding it. If the other side of it is our issues with the agencies that we're working with them.
That's right.
But in terms of this report, I just want to make sure I understand. So if if we were asked, or public looking at this or something, just understood what we were looking at.
I presume that this came from the compliance audit? Isn't that
Part of it, the last column is, would would have, that would be the programming piece, so that's the unused program portion. So that's not part,
That's from
necessarily
Sandag's
part of the,
figures.
right, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I think I understand now when you're talking about that's that difference. I couldn't figure out where the other dollars could be coming from, but it's a mix. That blend.
It's a mix, right,
Yeah.
because if the bonds are programmed, and that would be more than the sales tax received.
Right.
Right,
Okay,
because of advance funding.
That makes sense. Okay, thank you. That was really my.
No, it's whatever you're getting off. Any others? I have a couple, but anybody else has? You know, somewhat related to Jonathan's point about where there's been improvement in reducing unused balances. You know, it strikes me that as we highlight in the introductions to the local agency street and road balance and the compliance with maintenance effort requirement, one of our core functionalities is to in fact provide oversight, right? That the agencies are or the entities are living up to the letter and spirit of the ordinance. And so in that regard, I'm wondering if we could do a little bit more to highlight which entities are not meeting the thresholds that we're talking about, to make it stand out a little bit more, perhaps use a different coloring or something of that nature.
Okay, could I suggest, and again, thank you, Kai, for bringing this and noticing this. Could I suggest you've got notes 1 through 4. Could we have a notes 5 and 6 and say, City of San Diego has increased by 30 million because they are putting money together for bridges, for that future bridge work they hope to do, or something to explain, and the county. And if it's blended, if that's the reason, there were bonds issued which make more funds available. Just notes 5 and 6 to explain those two big disparities from the previous year's report. Does that make sense? Okay. Because you know some taxpayer who reads this stuff might call and say, hey, why is et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, so we would add those 2 footnotes, and then we would also
Two
add something
footnotes.
to the introductory
Yeah, that's a great
paragraph
point,
to
because I
highlight.
think the first thing that,
Okay.
you know, because we've got lots and lots of numbers, and there's sort of people will be drowning, but
That's right.
But the thing that we really want to highlight is that, on the one hand, most of the entities are meeting the thresholds, but there are several who aren't, and we want to point people's attention to that. And then the second question is, well, why? Is there some reasonable explanation?
Okay.
And if there is, let's provide that. And if there's not, then, well, they'll have to.
And it's really only those 2 agencies, and maybe give it a try. We'll see what a footnote would look
Yes,
like.
will do.
Thank you.
And then also on the compliance chart, I'm just wondering if there might not be another way to
Which one?
the
Is that on page 8?
the compliance with maintenance of effort requirement
Okay.
chart. You know, there are so many NAs in there. I'm wondering if there's somehow, I don't know if it's through use of footnotes or, I don't know, just to sort of clean up that chart
Maybe
visually a
simplify it
little
some.
bit. I'm sorry?
Simplify it, so you don't have the same repetitive
This-
NA, or?
Well, I mean, you know, other than in like, you know, maybe it's 6
Front page.
cells, virtually everything out in the right of the first 3 columns is an NA, other than the incompliance, yes and no.
So this
You know what I
chart
mean?
is directly out of the audit, and Lisa, we're looking at the maintenance of effort chart on page 9. So, I mean, I think we could simplify it somehow, so we don't show so many NAs, that's the comment. Okay, and still get the same point across somehow.
Yeah, again, just visually, it's just very cluttered, and it
Yeah.
kind of makes you wonder.
Okay. Yeah, we could just put zeros there, or a
about eliminate it if it's not needed?
Yeah, I mean, it could be blank. If there's nothing there, it almost seems as though there's a possibility that something wasn't accurately populated. So typically we want something there. So we can, we can always do a dash for a zero.
Yeah,
Meaning that
How about
there was
words?
nothing.
What about words? Just a short paragraph for fiscal year 14, 13, and 12. Everybody was in compliance except.
Yeah, we could do it that way as well. And just show fiscal year 15. And then, but then even within 15, there's all the NAs.
Yeah, I guess I was not wanting to reduce the attention on the yes, no, but highlight that I guess it's the only national city that has one instance of no on the whole chart. And maybe this doesn't work because it's really responsive to the ordinance, but I was almost wondering if there could be a statement or like, footnotes saying that other than Del Mar, San Diego, and I guess National City and Vista, all of the expenditures related to streets and roads, and just take out the columns. But I guess if that's not appropriate, then let's not do that. But you get the main point. This is very visually kind of cluttered, so
Yeah.
I'm no graphic artist, but
Oh, okay.
if there's a way to simplify that, that would be nice.
I add one sentence? Thank you. I'm looking, I happen to look at note number 2, footnote number 2.
On page 9?
On page
Page
5, I'm
five.
still back on what we're talking about, the remaining unused programming. And I see that note number 2 says, which applies to both City of San Diego and County of San Diego, says exactly what you were talking about, Lisa, that it includes unspent interest. I can't believe we've had that much interest, but also proceeds from bond and commercial paper. So that's what you were saying,
Right.
and I was suggesting you add a 5 and a 6. Those two agencies have increased by so much that you may want to refer to them specifically, or you may want to modify number 2 to give some specifics for those two agencies, if the committee agrees. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Footnote number 2 says exactly
Yeah.
what you were talking about. You've already tried to cover it, but boy, really, just look at it and see what you think. Thank you. This is our report to the world. It says that, and so it's our report card, you might say, for what the work that Sandag is doing and also for our oversight.
Sorry. Is the maintenance of effort re-indexing chart a new chart?
It is one that only, your audit takes a look at only every 3 years.
Every 3 years.
Oh, okay.
So that's why you don't
We've done
see
it before,
it
but not
last
last year.
Correct.
Right, okay.
Do you want to hear something nice? Okay.
We're trying to be nice.
No, because I know how it is. Remember college when you got back your term paper or something, and they always make comments about things that you missed. So I would like to say, actually it looks very professional, it's colorful, and for what it is, it's interesting. I mean, it's not a bestseller.
I agree. Who actually put this together? Did you, Ariana?
It's a team effort.
Team effort,
Yes.
okay, no, it's a very handsome product.
But that's not a quote you'll ever hear Trump say.
Oh, no, that is correct.
One thing I'm curious about is would there be a Brown Act compliant way to perhaps solicit comments from the committee, prior to the meeting so that we could, if we get into a situation where as we see here today, there are lots of comments, crowded meeting, we could perhaps focus a little bit more on the discussion of the comments. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think we could probably send you revised draft. Is
Yeah,
what
that
you're
might be,
referring to?
yeah.
Okay.
Just if there's a way to kind
Yes,
of
and still be compliant.
push a little bit of the work to our independent review,
Okay.
that would be great. Is there anything else? Okay.
Yep, that's
Okay.
good.
So, given that there are some comments,
Yes.
we don't have to make a motion to.
No, we will bring it back to you in
approve
June.
today. Great. Okay, then moving on to item number 8, Susan, the early action program budget update.
Good morning. I'm here today to present the FY 2017 Early Action Program Budget Update. The last time the program budget was presented here to ITALC was with the 2015 Plan of Finance item, which was presented at your January meeting. The final FY 17 SANDAG program budget is scheduled to be presented for approval by the SANDAG Board of Directors at its May 27, 2016 meeting. And a summary of the budget changes which are proposed with the final FY 2017 program budget are shown in attachment 1 of your report, and the details are found in the report. Pending approval by the Board of Directors on May the 27th, the Early Action Program is growing by almost $646 million, of which $357 million is finance cost associated with the Midcoast project, and $289 million additional capital cost, which represents about a 4.5% capital cost increase for the program. The annual budget update provides the opportunity for project teams to right-size their budgets based on updated cost estimates. So I'll provide some highlights of the changes between the approved budget and the proposed budget for FY 17. So the Midcoast Light Rail Transit Project is showing a budget increase of $484 million, of which bringing the revised budget to $2.2 billion. These figures are consistent with what was presented to the Board of Directors in January of this year and Transportation Committee on October 16th, 2015. Of the $484 million, $127 million is needed to cover a capital cost increase for award of the construction contract, and the remaining $357 million is due to the inclusion of the finance cost. So I think we've mentioned it before, the financing costs for this project are eligible for reimbursement, consistent with the anticipated full funding grant agreement. So we've included that cost here so that we can be reimbursed through the FFGA. Primary construction of the project is expected to begin in the second half of 2016 and anticipated service to begin in 2021. An additional $13.4 million is being added to the Elvira to Marina double track project, also being constructed as part of the Midcoast CMGC. The budget increase is due to additional scope added by NCTD and the City of San Diego. So those entities have covered the cost of that increase. Moving south, on the South Bay BRT project, a budget increase of $15.8 million is needed due to revised engineers' estimates based on the actual bid amounts received from the initial construction contract, which was awarded in December of last year. You'll see that we continue to advance projects on the goods movement corridor, adding new funding of $62 million, bringing in new state dollars and toll revenues for the construction of the 905, 125, 11 southbound connectors. Construction is scheduled to begin in 2018. And we're continuing with investment on the high priority projects on the regional Bikeway program projects. We're moving into new phases of work on 11 bike projects. 7 are now fully funded for construction, and 4 are now fully funded for final design. New design work and construction phase costs are being added to the scope. In addition, 2 bike projects, the North Park Mid-City Bikeways and the Uptown Bikeways projects, were split into 11 sub-segments, each with their own CIP number. So the number of CIPs within the program is growing. This will allow for advancing those segments, which are further along in the project development phase, as well as providing greater transparency and project management for those segments. Fund availability for the Bikeway program was verified with the 2015 Plan of Finance. That concludes my report. Do you have any questions? Do you have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Obviously, I'm going to ask you about the Coastal Rail Trail. I know you have in here that a budget increase of more or less $18 million, but that's the same project where you're not sure if you can go ahead and the vote or something. It said in here it's coming up before the board on May 27th. My question is this: what are you going to do with this particular project with its $18 million if you cannot go ahead to construction, which is scheduled to begin this fall? What are you gonna do with this money, or how's it gonna work?
Are you speaking about the Coastal Rail Trail San Diego Rose Creek project?
Oh, so that's not the same one.
1223016.
That's a
That's a
different
different
project.
project.
Okay, that's good, that's good.
And those funds are just being added because we're adding the construction phase, so we're
Okay,
funding the
good.
construction phase.
Thanks.
So the bikeway projects, are those limited to those that are on a street or a road? Or?
There's, the EAP for the Bikeway program, the priority projects are a mix of, bike facilities on and off street, bike paths,
Do they need to be dedicated bike, or could they be multi-use? So I'm thinking in particular the San Diego River Parks Coast to Crest Trail.
Mhm.
Are they even eligible to be on this list as a JPA, or must you be a jurisdiction, or how does?
So the projects that are being funded, the board approved a bicycle program, including the early action program, the criteria that kind of listed, the top ranked projects. And so that's what's being funded, kind of projects in that general priority.
So theoretically, JPA could have been within that
I mean, the
grouping and just didn't get the priority.
Yeah, we can take a look at that to see if it's in the, if it's in the bike plan, and if so, where it is.
Okay, thank you.
Again, a general question, and perhaps Andre's going to discuss this, or Rob later. You're increasing the EAP budget by $645 million. How are you going to, simple question, how do you plan to get this money? More bonds, or is this in any way dependent upon this proposed new bond measure that I've been reading about in the paper with interesting comments?
So maybe I can take that question. So none of these projects are dependent on the new sales tax measure.
All right.
All of these projects are included as part of the Transnet program, as well as there's a few other projects that are not part of the Transnet program we're also working on. As Susan mentioned, the sizable portion of the $600 million increase to the capital program size is because we're adding the interest cost that's associated with the Mid-Coast project to the project budget. That's so that we can be consistent with what we're telling the Federal Transit Administration. As part of the full funding grant agreement, they would pay for half the interest charges, but we need to show them what those would be. So that's why we're adding those. So there's a number of things, but none of these projects are dependent on the new sales tax.
Okay, not dependent upon new sales tax. Right. How about our existing bond measures that we've been passing? Will they cover these increases?
Right. Maybe Andre wants to add more, but we are planning on going back to market to issue additional bonds this summer to cover the anticipated expenses over the next year or so to continue all of these projects.
All right, thank you. Andre and I had a brief discussion about DCRs before our meeting just now. But thank you, thank you.
Yes?
Okay. Thank you, Susan. So, item 9, Lisa, quarterly financial report.
This is the quarterly report that contains different financial information that's been was compiled based on the Brt 2 triennial performance audit results and certain items based on ITAC requests. So I'm going to stop me and ask questions whenever. I'm just going to quickly go through. Attachment 1 is the overall view of where we stood at March 31st. We're showing our sales tax allocations. This is kind of where we're splitting things out versus our other income. Then we have our program disbursements and then our disbursements for debt service purposes. That would be on pages 1 and 2 of attachment 1. And then on page 2, we're also showing our commercial paper activity. Our other activity, this is between the major corridor and the major corridor EMP programs, and that's for the ordinance. And then on page 3, we have our bond activity. I believe we've added a couple of footnotes on page 3. We've added 5 and 6, I believe, are both new. So we've fully dispersed both our 2010 and 2012 bond proceeds. And when you look at the figures, you'll notice that there is more disbursement than proceeds, and that would be due to interest earned on the proceeds. We just lump it all together and just consider it all proceeds at the time of disbursement. And then we also mentioned in note 6, we didn't have this information previously, but there was a premium on the 2012 and the 2014 bonds, so we wanted to call that out. Are there any questions on attachment 1? You need a couple minutes or so to review. Okay, I'm going to move on. Okay, attachment 2. This would provide another snapshot, and this is, of course, just for the local street improvement, the street and road portion, the cities and the county. So we're showing our allocations on the left, and then we're showing where the balances are currently held on the amounts at SANDAG and what the local jurisdictions are holding. Then we're moving over showing what's been remaining of the current program projects to come to column J, which is always what we want to focus on, and that's where we're looking at the 75% threshold. And there were only 2 cities, same as the last quarter. It's the Carlsbad and Encinitas, and as mentioned earlier, they did provide their letters of explanation with a plan to spend down the funds. Any questions on? Okay. Yeah.
I apologize. In column K, the change Q2 to Q3. Which change is that measuring?
That's looking at column J. So the change between what the
what J was.
Yeah, what J was.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
And is everyone that's over 100% using?
They're in the debt program.
Yeah,
So it's either
all right.
bonds or La Mesa would be commercial paper.
Bonds or commercial paper?
Right, because they're spending more than their sales tax.
Right,
They're advance funding the project.
I don't understand one number on, I look at this so frequently. Let's look at City of San Diego.
Okay.
You show your column J, 98.3% cumulatively spent.
Well, that's taking into account what they have programmed as well. So it's not necessarily what's been spent at this point,
Okay.
but based on what they've programmed, what is anticipated. If they were to spend everything that's programmed.
Okay, of course. But then you look under column H, you got 46 million remaining programming out of 233 actual. That's not 98%.
Well, now the 233 though, that's cumulative, so that's not just the current year, that's over
I know that's
the life.
cumulative.
Right, and column H is going to be focusing on the current tip.
Okay, well, why do you have under column J, you call it cumulative percent?
Well, it's anticipated to be spent over the life of the program to this point. So what we're saying is with all of the funds that have been collected thus far, backing out anything that's been spent, and then also taking into account anything that's programmed. So we're assuming that they're gonna spend everything that's programmed. And if that were to happen, then they will have spent 98% of their collections thus far.
Just maybe for clarification, is I'm intuiting that the question may be, how can it be credible that we're expecting them to spend, $50 million basically in a month and a half? Is that actually credible? Is that part of what you're saying?
That's part of it. It may be the terminology under column J. Excuse me, Lisa, we looked at this so much.
No, it's okay.
This says anticipated percent to be spent
Right.
at 6/30/16.
Right.
Cumulative.
Right.
And my first reaction was, well, they've cumulatively received 233 million since this program began, and they have remaining programming to be done of 46 million. And it just, what am I missing?
Okay,
Well,
can
and
I
also look at the
Yeah,
cash.
somebody.
If you look at the cash balance, so that's column F, that is what,
You're right.
that is where we are right now, right?
Yep.
So really, at this point, there's 42 million available for spending. And they have, remaining program is 46,
So they programmed,
in, well, I believe, it also okay, so we have our cash balance, but then we also have our future allocations. So taking all of that into account, so it's B plus F, and then you back out H to come to I. So I is, so we're looking at, so that's the formula, right? So if you look at the column header, so what we're doing is we're saying, here's the amount of cash that we have now.
That's under
For
B.
the last quarter of the year, if we were to receive sales tax as estimated, there would be another 7.7 million. Okay, so that would give us a new total. And then we want to say, but look, here's what they have programmed. This is what they're telling us that they are going to spend. That's the 46. So the only, if they were to spend all of that, the only remaining funds would be what's in column I, the 3.6. So that would get them to 98%.
Right.
And is that credible? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to clarify. I think we might be getting confused because isn't there programming also when they have to have utility agreements, or like, I forget the name of the gentleman from the city, what's his name, that comes and talks to us? The project works guy?
Nagelbort?
Yeah, what, Jim? Was it Jim?
James.
James, okay. James said that they have to have the money in hand before they go out to bid or they write a contract or something else. So let's say they have a $5 million contract. They have to program the money for that contract, even though it isn't in quotes spent, until the contractor does his work and he gets his timely payments. But they have to put it on there in the program column, which means they're sort of saving it for when they get the bill.
Well, but that gets to Jonathan's question about terminology. I mean, item
Right.
J refers to spent
It
as
says-
opposed to programmed.
That's right, anticipated percent to be spent.
Well, because it's assuming that they're going to spend everything that's been programmed, because that's, I mean, that is
Well-
part of the purpose of programming it, is to say, we're actually gonna spend it in this year.
Okay, so just again for clarification, the term "to be spent"
Right.
at 6/30/16 means that it actually will be
No, it's
spent.
anticipated, it's anticipated.
It sounds like it.
No, so there's a
It's-
footnote that I think explains what Lisa's saying, but I hear what you're saying is just looking at that column.
Yeah.
It's assuming we're gonna spend the 46, but the city of San Diego will be able to spend that 46 million
Yeah.
over the next 3 months, which is probably unlikely.
I don't want to go over this
Yeah.
question every time I look at this.
So maybe we change the
Maybe you
title
change
of
the
the
wording to
column.
say anticipated percent to be programmed to be spent in the future.
Did you read the footnote 6? Does that help you?
Yeah, I read footnote 6, and I think there's a little, there remains a bit of ambiguity, frankly,
Okay.
but in my mind. But,
Okay, thank you.
We're mixing actual
Yeah.
expenditures and programming.
Programming.
Right.
So we can look at the
Right.
title, and we can look at that column
Pro-
title and see if there's a
program
better way
to
to
be s-
communicate that.
To be spent in
Okay.
the future, programmed by 6:30, such and such, to be spent in the future, or something like that, under future contract. Play
So, okay, I don't know if I can,
wordsmithing.
so,
well,
it was,
We'll
it
try
was
to clarify
it was
that.
requested to put the programming on here so that you can see where they
No,
plan to go.
we've asked for all of this.
Right. And it is a little kind of apples to oranges.
We've gotten what we've
Money
asked for.
spent program. So this is just saying that the agency is looking, this is what they have programmed. which
You're
is what
saying they're
telling
planning,
us
they
they're
have
planning
plans to
draw
spend
down.
it.
Correct.
They have plans to
That's their
spend it.
plan.
Right.
And by 6:30, by the end
Well,
of this
I-
year.
yeah, we are wordsmithing here, but I think what is, at least for me, a little tricky is the word anticipated. I think actually footnote 6 perhaps clarifies the situation, and because, and correct me if I'm wrong, column J is not really a forecast of monies which actually are anticipated to be spent.
Right.
It really does represent what I think is perhaps better explained in footnote 6, which is a theoretical place that we would end up with if they actually spent the money.
Yes.
But let's not kid ourselves, folks, we're not really expecting that they're gonna really spend all that.
But we have to show that because that's what the
Yeah, I
program,
understand, yeah.
right?
Yeah, you can say it's sort of like promised to a particular project, either by a contract, a utility agreement, something else, but if the work isn't done by their contractor, they don't pay until.
No, I think, yeah. No, I think-
We'll work on heading language.
That's-
But ultimately, the result is what you're expecting, that the way we put this together. It's just the heading that's a little confusing for that column.
Those numbers represent the balance remaining, if estimated.
Yeah, and
funds.
it's like a big if.
So that looks, but still, that's, okay.
If it would be permissible to use a word like hypothetically or theoretically, that would make it more clear, but maybe that's.
Yeah, we'll work on something. We'll come to a consensus on something that makes sense. And we can pass by you, Stuart, would you like that? Before the next quarter, we can do that and get your buy-in on that.
It only happens in government, right?
Any other questions on attachment 2? Okay. Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's move on.
All right. Attachment 3, okay, attachment 3 would be our sales tax revenue collections through March. To see where we are at 0.53% of March with the forecast at 3.5%. And of course, the middle section disclaimer is only updated once a year. So. Okay. Attachment 4 would be your, the ITOPS operating budget. Show you where we are right now. For FY16, there was the use of carryover only, and no new allocation. So for the fiscal and compliance audits would be the first line under expenses. You can see that 87,000 was spent or paid thus far. Final payment doesn't occur until the reports are actually issued. So we expect to receive the final invoice either late June or beginning of July. And we are expecting a little bit of savings on that contract. Nobody submitted for mileage yet. If you want to, there's some money there. And then you can see what carryover we're looking at right now. 38. Some of that will be used up. Any questions on attachment 4?
The reserve, we haven't used the reserve. Is the reserve?
Yeah,
You've
that's
used it once
right.
before?
Huh?
You've used it once
Once.
before to
Okay.
hire legal counsel during the SR 125 acquisition.
I don't know if you, were you here then?
I don't recall it, but I don't, maybe, I don't
Yeah,
remember.
so it was a decision made by ITAC a long time ago to
Yeah.
hold some money in the event that you should need it.
Okay.
The event you wanted outside.
Yeah, and
Right,
it doesn't
if
have
you
to be
wanted
legal
it.
counsel, it
Yeah,
can be,
even outside
yeah.
firm.
Okay, all right. And so it was set, I mean, it's not something we add to every year or something, or we really out.
It does get increased every year. I believe you have the same rate, CPI rate that all the others are increased.
Okay.
Yeah. So there is, you know, to give you a little bit of a bigger buffer, you know, when you do the next budget, you can always change that number however you like. You can increase it, decrease it.
So the
Ask us to
projected,
keep it
I
at 20
get-
every year.
I see. So the projected numbers are just the same, the dollars that are sitting there with adjustment, they're not, it's not adding new, we haven't. it's not-
Yeah, we've declined to take
Yes.
Right.
additional
I got it.
funding.
Right, because, there's sufficient funding, and even if all of the funds in FY 17 were spent, there would still be another 124,000 remaining that could be then carried, that would then just carry forward until that's used.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Attachment 5. So this is looking at the local agencies, the street and road, but the maintenance portion, the 30% of their local street and roads, to ensure that they are not spending down more than 30%, which is the cap allowed. So it's, you know, similar to the other attachment where we're showing, here's what's allocated, here's other funds, what's been expended to give us what our, excuse me, our balance is, which is column E. Or excuse me, that would be the available balance should we have cash on hand. Column F is the cash, and there are a couple of jurisdictions that are in bold in column F, and for the most part, those, or actually all of them, are going to be less than the 30% balance, and the reason for that is those jurisdictions have spent more than 70% of their annual allocations on their congestion relief projects, thereby reducing the overall cash available. So in the future, what we do is we monitor this column E. So in the future, when you know, more cash, when we have more cash on hand, if they can spend up to whatever we have in column E, as long as we have cash. Any questions there? And then attachment 6 would be our grant programs. And this was at the request of the ITAC to provide this information. So we have it broken out by our Bike Ped program, the Smart Growth, our local EMP, and our senior mini grants. Total revenue received is the actual revenue collected within each of these programs. And then a couple of them have what we're calling non-grant or regional revenue. That would just be the difference between what's been awarded for grants from the revenue received. We're just taking the difference there. We do have our grantee expenditures, what's been spent to date. And then you were interested in seeing what the unspent grant commitments are. I do want to point out that senior mini grant. So you'll see in column A, they've received a total of 10.1 million in revenue, but they awarded 11.9 million. And that's because they're taking into account their FY17 allocations. They've awarded a portion of that. Of course, we can only pay out what we have on hand. The expectation is that by the time 17 comes around, they'll be starting, that phase of those grants. And so, there won't be any cash problems between awarding in advance. Any questions on that one? That's it.
Thank you, Lisa. Anything else? Okay, so then moving on to item 10, which will be an overview of the financial markets with Ray and Andre. Morning.
So it's been a full quarter since the Federal Reserve finally decreased interest rates after a decade back in December by 25 basis points. So we're just going to take a look at what's happened over the last quarter. And in general, markets don't like rising interest rates as far as the stock market, with the notion that people like safer investments such as bonds, they take them out of stocks. And so the markets got off to a real rough start this year, with most of the indices, the Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ actually below 10% through February. And the truth is that wasn't really just based on what happened with the increase in the rates, but it was also the fact that it became known that China was really slowing their growth, continued problems that we saw in Europe and the turmoil in Russia. In fact, we also saw a huge drop in commodity prices, where oil went as low as the mid-20s. Now it's back in the 40s. And also, as Ray will discuss here, the labor markets and the GDP in the United States started slowing over the first quarter too. So the Federal Reserve actually met a couple times during the quarter, and they, without kind of coming out and saying it, the initial thought was that the Feds may raise rates 4 times this year, but the indications that it may happen once, maybe not even at all. They may have a rate increase in June. If that doesn't happen, they probably won't do any rate increases until the end of the year, because certainly they don't want to get involved in the election time frame. So basically, based on that, the markets have rallied back, and if you were to look at your 401k in February, you'd be very disappointed, but if you opened it up as of now, it would basically be flat or a little bit higher. So it's amazing how resilient the market is, and things came back really strong. So what does that all mean for Sandag? As far as our variable rate demand bonds, which are hedged in our commercial paper, they did trade a little higher as we anticipated. But on the positive side, our investment earnings really increased quite a bit. Just from one quarter to the next, we went up from 76 basis points to 87 basis points, which is a 15% increase. If you annualize that over a year, it's about $1 million that we'll potentially see in additional interest earnings. But the best part about it all is the timing for us right now is, although the Feds increased the short-term rates, the long-term rates actually fell. With a 30-year Treasury, which is kind of a proxy of what we look at, went down about 20 basis points. So as we brought to you guys last month, the fact that we're going to the bond market in July sometime, rates are probably at the lowest that we've seen in a long time, and hopefully they'll hold. We continue to proceed with the getting ready for the bond issuance in July. We actually have an important credit presentation to the rating agencies, to S&P and Fitch, June 1st. And we do have AAA ratings, but with our debt service coverage, that will be coming down a little bit as we issue potentially $350 million. Our goal is to keep our AAA ratings, but we know that we're kind of on the cusp of maybe not being AAA, but obviously we have a really good presentation, and part of what we'll show to them is how strong and resilient the San Diego economy is, even through tough times. Things do well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ray, and he'll kind of tell you how sales tax receipts are doing and how the economy here in general is doing. Tax receipts are doing.
Yeah, so the last couple times that we talked, I showed you how the the global economy was affecting the national economy, and that we were kind of insulated from it, but that it wasn't doing as well as some may have predicted. And so I wasn't feeling that we were doing too well. And last week, the Federal Open Market Committee held a meeting, and Janet Yellen said that economic activity appears to have slowed. So she's now in agreement with what we were thinking for the last couple of months. But essentially, everything that Andre said is true. The market is not very hot right now. Last year, in 2015, the revised GDP came in at 2.4% growth. So that's not really great. We would like to see something closer to 3% for it to be an expansion. First quarter of 2016 was 0.5%. So we're running at a rate of about 2% growth right now, which again is very slow. The Fed's looking at the inflation rate really is the key indicator as to whether or not they raise interest rates, and that hasn't moved, especially with the lower fuel prices. Although some numbers that you may have seen reported that unemployment rate is down and that jobs have increased, there really is weaker than expected payroll reports, and we created about 160,000 jobs in April. We would have needed to create about 100,000 more than that in order to really be looking at truly an expansion. The other negative factor is that the labor force participation rate was revised downward again. So now it's at 62.8%. So that's basically saying that people aren't, it's the percentage of people that are actually working. So when you look at the unemployment rate, it looks low, but it's because a lot of the people aren't actively seeking employment right now. So we talked about that last time. But locally, we really do have a more resilient economy, and we've been able to have job increases even though the nation hasn't been doing that well. And our local unemployment rate is about 4.7%, so that's significantly lower than both the nation and the state. And even with the anemic growth that we have seen nationally, we seem to do okay. Andre mentioned part of a presentation that we're putting together for the rating board, and what we're taking a look at there is the composition of our economy and the fact that we have a large military presence here, and with the Pacific pivot, more military is coming to San Diego, and that's pretty resistant to the recession because they're going to continue to move ships in here through 2024. We also have a very strong hospitality industry, which is the tourism industry. Although they may offer low-paying jobs, it also seems to be relatively resistant to recession, because what happens is when people have less money to spend on vacations, then a lot of people start to take local vacations. So we see, instead of having international tourism, we see people coming down from Los Angeles, for instance, to take advantage of a lot of the things that we have here in San Diego. So that part of the economy is a little bit resistant to recession, along with the innovation sector, which is one of the fastest growing sectors with the highest paying salaries here in the region. It's fueled by nearly $1 billion worth of venture capital, and that's the one that's creating a lot of high paying jobs in the region. Those three that I just mentioned now account for about 1/3 of our economy. And so when you take a look at that, it buffers other things that are going on. So we're not like a Houston or a New Orleans, where if oil prices crash, then the entire market goes down in the area because everything is tied to that one industry. We're very diverse in terms of our economy. So we'll be talking about that at the rating agencies. And if you have any questions, we can answer them now. I also did this handout, which I was at the EDC this morning, and they came up with this, which is it's an analysis of the impact of Transnet over the last 25 years. So what they took a look at is what the $3.3 billion that we've spent to date has done for the region, and it's very interesting statistics. They go much further than we normally go here at Sandag when we do any of these calculations, and we do a lot of the financials. But what you'll see with them is they started looking at things like not only how well the money was leveraged, so that and what it's created in the economy. So the $3.3 billion we collected, we leveraged that by $10 billion. That created a $20 billion economic impact, and it's supported 5,300 jobs on average over the last 25 years. But you take a look at where the jobs are, they're not all construction jobs, although it's the biggest category, 39%. Now, it basically leaves a significant portion, 61% of the jobs are in other industries or support industries to construction that have been supported here. And it's had a tremendous impact economically. If you look at it's the back cover, but it's the fold-in thing. In a large part because of the Transnet investment, San Diego ranks #1 against its peers in terms of lowest average commute time and also lowest delays per commuter. And that's very encouraging news, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've taken bottlenecks like the 15 and the 52, and we've improved them over the years and moved, using Transnet, we can now move people much more quickly through there. So that was a very encouraging piece of information that they released. Some of the other interesting statistics was that we travel 77 million miles a day here in the region. So that's like going to the moon and back 167 times, which is it's a tremendous amount of people moving back and forth on the regional network that we're responsible for. And they also looked at international trade, and $40 billion worth of trade moves back and forth across the San Ysidro border. So they looked at the international component of that, and it's about 62 million tons of goods that are moved, and 92% of that is on the highways. So that was very interesting information, and so I know it wasn't on the agenda, but since I got it this morning, I thought I'd pick some of these up and share it with you. So, and that concludes my part of the report and the extra report. Yes.
Do you think that, you're telling us the facts. I'm asking for your gut now. What does your gut say about the end of this year as far as growth in the economy or Transnet revenues?
The local economy or the national economy?
No, local.
The local
because
economy?
Transnet, I'm thinking of the Transnet revenue.
I think that the local economy will continue to outpace the national economy. I think we're going to see a little bit of slowing there. We're having a lot of difficulty moving that forward. It's an election year, and I look at things like Janet Yellen, meeting with the president before she does her report, and her report comes out, and this is an abnormal year. So I don't know that they're going to raise the rates. I don't believe they will during the election year. They don't want to do anything that would upset the apple cart, as Andre said. I think San Diego will fare better, though. I think that the diversity that we have it really is helping. When you think about the military pivot, we have 37 ships here. It's going to go to 54, something like that, in the next couple of years. They can't bring them in fast enough because they don't have berths to put them in. They're going to spend $1 billion building a SEAL training base down in Imperial Beach to move them off of Coronado so that they can put more facilities there. It's a tremendous amount of spending that's coming into the region that we don't even see. And with the innovation sector too, you look at things like that have been spawned from UCSD, things like Illumina, where in 1990 it would have cost $3 billion to sequence somebody's genes, and it would have taken years to do. It's now $129, and you can do it on the internet by just giving a little saliva to them. It revolutionizes the way that we're going to be able to treat diseases, that we're going to be able to do all sorts of different things, and all those businesses start here in San Diego. So there's a tremendous amount of positive news in certain sectors in this region. In addition to that, the price of housing here is significantly lower than it is in the San Francisco Bay Area. We're at about $550,000. They're at $1.3 million. And although their salaries are higher, and although they pay wages that are about double, the housing prices are about triple. So you have people who have $200,000 salaries living in essentially storage containers, right? This is like the new norm up in San Francisco. That doesn't last very long. And so what ends up happening, I think, is that we become even more competitive as we become a hub for this high-tech activity. So I think that, it's a long answer to your story, but I know a lot of times I come in with the negative stuff, but that's really more the national stuff. There's a lot of good things going on in San Diego that I think will help us do well. But with that said, sales tax is a function of how much people are willing to spend. So a lot of it has to do with consumer confidence. And a lot of our sales tax, we're still trying to figure out what percentage of it comes from people spending it who come in from outside the region, so either across the border or coming in, you know, from tourism. And with a strong dollar, what ends up happening is that there's fewer dollars that are spent here that are taxable. So we're still looking at about 3.35% increase in the sales tax revenue this year, which is a little bit lower than it was last year. But it is something that we're following very closely, because there seems to be some leakages, and we're trying to identify exactly where those are. If it's going to different regions, or if it's going, you know, if there's another reason for that happening. If there's another reason.
Yes, if I could ask a follow-up on that, how granular can you slice the sales tax data? I mean, can you get into, you know, which particular places that money's coming from to try to get some insight into, as you're describing, you know, what the dynamics are that are either fueling growth or creating sort of negative surprise?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So we can get all the way down to the individual business level. Okay. So we have a report that shows us how much was collected from Jerome's Furniture, how much was collected from Amazon.com, how much was collected from different auto dealerships. So we can get to that level, so we can start doing some analysis of that. But yes, we have very detailed information.
So is there anything that you've been able to do so far that even points to that there have been, you know, notable moves between categories of sources at all?
There's nothing that we've seen that would jump out at us, and there seems to be slowing everywhere in other counties too, not just ours. So we're trying to understand why that is, but we haven't found a trend yet. There have been some changes in terms of the composition of the sales tax, and that's something that we want to look at a little bit more. But if you're interested in that, you know, I could definitely report more on that at the next meeting.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you find anything,
okay,
it would be interesting, but I don't think we're suggesting that you do a special project just for us. But.
All right. Well, but it is something that's on my plate in terms of looking at and understanding the sources of the revenue.
Right. Any other questions?
I just have one, and that is, does this data tell you, like, if you get more tax revenue, let's say from the northern part of the county or the eastern part or southern, I mean, do you break it down by region? And if you do by region, how small is the region that you're looking at?
So we have the information at a jurisdictional level. We've worked with the company that puts that together to get it at a jurisdictional level, so we can tell how much, for instance, National City collects versus Chula Vista or Carlsbad, and you know, some of those with the auto dealerships are always large sales tax components, but it's relatively complicated because if I live in El Cajon and I buy a car in Carlsbad, that sales tax is paid in El Cajon, and therefore you have to rectify all that stuff. So it's not just necessarily the point of sale.
Yeah.
So it is with retail, for instance. So you have to kind of figure out what's going on, but we can tell jurisdictionally, you know, what's collected, and you know, it's kind of obvious, but it's those areas that have, like Carlsbad, that have a shopping mall, they have a Legoland, and they have cars. They have much higher percentage of sales tax than, for instance, in Escondido, which has fewer of that, because people would go over there to do the shopping.
Just to close the gap, very quickly, Andre has been telling us before about the bond measure that you're planning for this summer. And you commented, Jose, that that was the source of funds to pay for our EAP increases that you reported on. So that closes the gap, am I correct? And you're planning on about $350 million, is that right?
Yes.
And the balance, going back to that EAP, the balance of that $300 million increase is through return of financing?
State and federal funds.
Thank you.
Excuse me, federal funds.
From federal funds.
And state funds. Yes.
Okay, so that sort of ties together those two subjects. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray and Andre.
Thank you.
Okay, next, we're gonna talk about the update on the potential funding measure.
Michael?
Rob?
Find your way here.
You know, if I could just say, I apologize, I'm not sure if you presented to the committee before or not, I'm not recalling, but perhaps, can you just tell us sort of where you're coming from?
Sure. My name's Rob Rundle. I'm the principal planner here at Sandag. I've been at Sandag for about 21 years. I think I have presented at the ITOC maybe so long ago that some of the members did. So.
Great, thank you.
I've been working on this issue with the board and Sandag staff since 2004 when the Transnet measure was passed. So I thought I'd just very briefly go into some of the past history and then kind of get you up to speed on where the board is now and what they're considering and what they'll be doing over the next couple months. So, okay. So, as you probably know, in the Transnet extension ordinance under the Environmental Mitigation Program principles, principle number 10, I've listed some of that up here, obligated Sandag to go back to the voters to consider a funding measure to fill the regional obligation of the habitat conservation plans, the adopted habitat conservation plans in the San Diego region. And originally that requirement was to be met within 4 years after the passage of Transnet, which would have been in 2008. And the board 3 times, once in May of 2008, in November of 2009, and March of 2012, have amended that provision to extend it. And the reason primarily is because of the economic conditions and understanding through some research and polling that a measure likely would not pass. So the board, those 3 times, amended Transnet to extend that provision. And currently that provision in the ordinance requires the board to act by November of 2016. Again, if they decided to put that off, they could amend the Transnet measure again to postpone that, but they've been moving in a direction of looking at polling and discussions amongst themselves and the public, I should say, to see what the viability is for a measure, you know, as the years have passed, and now it seems like as good a time certainly as they've looked at in the past. In October of last year, a survey was conducted which indicated that support for a funding measure was at about 62%. And so at that point, the board requested that we put together expenditure plan and some materials that would enable them to make a decision on wanting to continue to move forward. So in February of this year, we, staff put together 2 options of what an expenditure plan could look like. And I should say that this was based on an assumption that it would be a half-cent sales tax for 40 years, which would generate approximately $18 billion, slightly over $18 billion. And so 2 options were put together. One that allocated about 40% of the revenues to the local jurisdictions, similar to the local streets and roads funding that is in the existing Transnet extension ordinance. So they'd have some flexibility of how that money gets spent. Although, and I'll get into a little later, but the uses of that money would be a little more broad than what's in the Transnet extension ordinance. So again, that one option had 40% going to the cities, and then the other 60% being allocated amongst regional projects, transit, highways, managed lanes, grade separations, and some grant programs. The other version, option B, allocated 100% of the funding to regional projects. So the project list was a lot more robust, but then again, it didn't enable the cities to have that flexibility to spend some of the funds on their highest priorities. And so we got some direction back from the board that they like certain aspects of both options. And so at the board that and had a discussion at the board retreat about that. And again, they had a lot of comments about certain aspects they liked and didn't like, and so in late March, after their retreat, we went back to the board with what we call the refined hybrid alternative, and that just made some more tweaks to what was in an expenditure plan. And after that, we did another survey just to kind of test where the board was on that, and that was done in late March and early April. And the results of that showed improved voter sentiment for potentially supporting something in November. So the results of that came back at about 68% support. And so we put together another expenditure plan version to take to the board based on some further refinements. And the slide I have up here shows the funding allocation of that nearly $18.2 billion for projects and the funding categories of where that would go. So you see the open space in line number 4, that's $2 billion, and that's to meet that obligation that's in the Transnet extension ordinance to fund the regional obligation for the habitat conservation plans. And I should just explain a little bit that when the cities in the region have adopted their habitat conservation plans, they enter into agreements with the state and federal resource agencies, and those agreements require that those jurisdictions entering into these agreements will work collaboratively to identify a regional funding source. So the whole way these habitat conservation plans are funded is through federal contributions, state contributions, local contributions, and then there's a piece of the pie that is a regional funding piece. And while SANDAG doesn't have a role in the habitat conservation plans, the jurisdictions that have signed on to these plans have an obligation to identify this regional funding piece. And so that is what SANDAG committed to helping the jurisdictions find through that provision in Transnet, that we would work together to find a regional funding piece to meet that obligation in those agreements. So without that, the jurisdictions will still be on the hook for finding that regional funding somehow. So this seems like a good way to work together to do that. But like I said, if either the board decides not to go forward, the board would then have that obligation to meet the language that I had that's in the EMP provisions. But the jurisdictions that have these agreements really have to, one way or another, with SANDAG or without SANDAG, find a regional funding source. So it really does benefit them tremendously if that can be met somehow. So again, going through, you can see the allocations of the funding. Active transportation's at 3%, the highways and managed lanes at 14.2%, transit capital operations at nearly 42%, local formula funds are at 24%, and then there's a signal synchronization program at 1%, and rail grade separation program at 5%. And in the oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, before you move on the local formula funds, the 24%, is there just roughly are the anticipated restrictions or allowances for that?
So there are some categories of which SANDAG, or I should say the restrictions are what SANDAG has the legislative authority to spend tax dollars on. So Senator Kehoe authored a bill in 2008 that expanded that beyond transportation to include habitat conservation, water quality enhancements, and beach sand nourishment. So in addition to the transportation funding that they've always been able to use the funding for, it would expand it to those other categories so they could spend it on those kind of things. When you look at the language and what's in our regional plan, they could implement their climate action plans with some of the funding could be used for that. Watershed protection, those types of uses that are more broad than what the existing streets and roads money can be.
A lot of flexibility beside the roads.
Correct.
So, okay, I'm looking at these percentages, and because I've heard some opposition environmental folks and things talking about that there's still not enough money in here for alternative transportation of the highway and roads, and I see only 14%.
Yeah, of that 14%, about 3% is for general purpose lanes, and 11.2%, I think, is for managed lanes. So, yeah, that is
Seems.
We hear that a lot.
Yeah,
too.
it seems like the argument that I've heard doesn't match up with, it's not founded based on what you're saying.
Yeah, and so theoretically, if a jurisdiction wanted to use all their local funding for transit or something, they could do that.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And actually, that was the question I had. So with regard to the local funding, you know, analogous to the 70% congestion relief requirement for spending in the current transit plan, there would be no minimum set for any particular type of spending. It would be basically, you know, unlimited abilities to spend on anything that would qualify within the broad description of the.
If they wanted to use all the money for maintenance, that is something they could use funding for.
Yeah.
They're similar to the Transnet measure. There's a maintenance of effort requirement for the local streets and roads money in the existing Transnet extension, and for the most of the transportation related investments that local jurisdictions would make, there is a maintenance of effort, so they could move funds around just to free up money, supplant funds.
There's some similarities. I mean, in terms of, just to give context on this particular sales tax measure versus Transnet, Sandag has a full, 1% authority under state law for a sales tax. So the first applicant has been in Transnet, since 1988, going on to 2048. This additional really was the categories were brought in because the role of Sandag in terms of regional planning and infrastructure is broader than transportation. It includes, habitat, which some of the mitigation portions are funded under the Transnet extension, but more broadly, beach sand projects. And then stormwater was a huge issue that the member agencies were facing with the MS4 permit and sort of an unfunded mandate. And so that's why the state legislation was passed to broaden the authority. So given that these funds are, in addition to transportation, it will, that's why it sort of expanded. There are different reasons for why it expanded to those kinds of categories. There's still some of the draft ordinance the board is actually going to discuss for the first time this Friday. There's similar provisions with regard to these local funds, but there's distinct differences. So, one thing we talked about was the eligible uses are broadened. The requirement to spend your money, the 30% fund balance, is one thing that's in the draft ordinance right now. But yes, the maintenance of effort is in there, but with regard primarily to the transportation portion, not necessarily for these expanded uses portion.
Right, so just to
Right.
make sure I'm understanding completely, a locality could choose to use 100% of the funds for transportation and 0 for habitat conservation or
Yes.
stormwater, whatever.
And what we had heard from both sort of the public outreach we've done with, just getting the public's input on all the vast needs, and also from our member agencies, the 18 cities in the county, was one of the reasons, as this expenditure plan was developed, that we heard sort of loud and clear was that each local jurisdiction had different needs. That they didn't want it to be, sort of dictated on all one or the other. They have different needs and different priorities.
My question is this, on your watershed management, could the city of San Diego's proposed project for their pure water be included?
So through this whole evolution of discussing these uses, there has been a lot of discussion about water supply versus water quality, and to the extent that there's some stormwater capture and reuse, that could be a potential use of the funding. But if it's a pure water supply project, it probably would not be eligible. But I think there's going to be a lot of projects that fall into that gray area. We'll have to have some really clear definitions about how it can and cannot be used. So just continuing on, I have a couple more slides. This just shows a map of the project. So I was going to reference an attachment that's in your report that outlines the expenditure plan and has all the funding categories and specific projects that funds would be allocated to. So in all the highway, general purpose managed lanes, connectors, the transit categories and the transit operations. And then there's also a table in there that shows the first year and then the 40-year allocation that would go to each of the jurisdictions. So what's not on this map is obviously the formula funds going to the city, the 1% I mentioned for signal synchronization, and the rail grade separations that's currently envisioned as a competitive grant program.
What do you mean by formula funds? The cities can choose the project?
So a portion of the funds, 24% in this case, would go directly to the cities, and that would be based on population. So they would get allocation of the sales tax revenues based on the population in their jurisdiction, and then they could use it on those defined uses, the habitat, water quality, beach sand, or transportation.
But it would be their choice.
Right, it'd be like the local streets and roads fund. So
Okay, thank you.
The reason you only show one grade separation on that map is because the rest are grant competition.
Yes, the one that's shown here in the purple diamond there is the Serena Valley Road, and that grade separation is coupled with a relocation of the coaster station. So they kind of have to go hand in hand, so that's how that project.
The rest are envisioned to be a local, like you say, local.
It would be a
grant program,
it would be a
but
competitive
basically like
program.
evaluate them
Yes.
by priorities. Yeah.
Correct. So while we haven't presented the entire ordinance to the board yet, that was mailed out on Friday, and it's going to be discussed with the board this Friday. At their April 22nd meeting, they did request that we present 3 provisions of the ordinance for them. So one was the use of the local funds that we just have been talking about. Another one was the Priorities Corridors program, which is similar to the Early Action program in the existing Transnet measure. And so we presented to them a Priority Corridors program. This would be the projects that would be worked on first if the measure was to pass. And so there's not a legend, I apologize, on the map, but it's a subset of the Expenditure Plan projects. And then those, the red being the transit projects in the South Bay, there's a couple BRT projects and a new trolley line, which we refer to as the purple line, that would extend from San Ysidro to Kearny Mesa, roughly along the 805 corridor. There's improvements on Interstate 5 South, some managed lanes again on 5 in North County, and then the State Route 78 improvements. There's State Route 52, SR 67, a small portion of Interstate 8, and the 125-94 connector is also in that Priority Corridors program. The Del Mar platform, I should also mention the connectors at 78.5, and then those orange circles represent service enhancements, and some in the North Coast it's rail double tracking projects. So there would be some service enhancements along there, some state of good repair projects like bridge replacements, and then the 2 in the lower part are service enhancements along the blue and orange line trolley. So those would be the projects that we would commit to advancing first if the measure were to pass. And so on the 29th, the board held a special meeting to consider whether they wanted to move forward with all this, and this was the recommendation we made to the board. I just changed it to past tense because it was actually what they ended up voting on and approving. So they directed staff to move forward with developing a final expenditure plan and ordinance to support the expenditure plan, as well as ballot language, and then return to them. So over the next few weeks, again, Friday we're going to be discussing the ordinance for the first time with them and the draft ballot language. We'll return later in May with any revisions they have or proposed changes to the ballot language and the ordinance. And then we're proposing to conduct a first reading of the ordinance in June and a second reading and adoption later in June, and then submit materials to the registrar in July for inclusion on the November ballot.
Didn't I read in the paper that only 13 of the member agencies voted in favor of proceeding?
Yes, I think that's accurate.
But what happened with the rest? Was there much opposition, or did I misread what I read in the paper? I thought I read.
Well, voting against it were the city of Escondido, Poway, and El Cajon. One member from the city of San Diego and one member from the county of San Diego.
Is this significant? In the years past, before the current program that we have, was there also opposition amongst the member agencies?
In 2004, for that measure, there was one vote in opposition, I believe.
The unincorporated area of the county voted against their representative.
Okay, well, my point is this going to clear the, if 1/3 of the member agencies representing the voters are opposed to, don't want to go through with this, is this good? I mean, is this portend the difficulty in November 8th election?
Well, I think that and some of the comments that were raised earlier, just about some of the environmental groups that have been casting this as, in a certain way. Any organized opposition is going to be a challenge. So yeah,
This requires 2/3 vote?
requires 2/3. Yeah, it will be a challenge.
Would it be premature to reference the discussion we had yesterday in terms of the ITOP portion of what might be contemplated here? Is that still too premature to?
No,
Well, it's part of the draft ordinance that the board will be considering on Friday, or discussing on Friday.
So in terms of the draft ordinance that the board is going to be discussing, a couple things to highlight with regard to the ITOC. I mean, while this will be a new sales tax, it's not an extension of the existing one, it is in fact a new sales tax. The thought was, at least from the staff level, and we'll see with the board, the discussions surrounding that, was not to create a whole separate taxpayer oversight committee, but basically to use this body. Because I think it's composed well. Some of the comments and recommendations from your triennial performance audit in terms of being able to stagger members' times and allowing the folks that do invest and do want to serve are able to serve beyond the strict not to exceed 8 years that's in the current measure. We're proposing some changes to that, basically taking the recommendations from your triennial performance audit and writing those in. I think one of the things we've changed or proposed to is rather than to increase also the annual allocation. Right now it's $250,000. It's escalated with CPI, but basically it's set a base level of about 400, given that there may be additional work. But in terms of the annual, the items are sort of structured similarly, right? So the ITOC is responsible for annual audits, for triennial performance audits. None of that is changed. There may be obviously additional, when your auditors go out, should this pass, if the auditors go out, there will be additional categories of expenses that they will need to look at because of the expansion of the eligible uses, particularly with the local street and roads. But we're trying to use the same sort of framework. It seems to have worked. It seems to have provided very good taxpayer protections in the current measures that we've overseen. I believe there will be additional work, especially up front. I was just sort of looking at the San Diego Board Policy 31, which lays out distinct rules, sort of interprets some of the ordinance language and other things for this body to follow. And we did spend a lot of time with the Transit Extension was developed to identify rules that provides for that next layer of detail that is going to be needed for proper oversight and auditing. So some of the things I envision we would do is perhaps look at broader categories and determine the areas that may be gray, whether there should be a more definitive list on things that are eligible uses of funds, for example.
If it passes, when would it be imposed, the additional tax?
The tax goes in April 1st. Yeah.
When?
April 1st, 2017.
Okay.
Yeah, the ordinance takes effect, basically, as soon as it passes, so the following day that the tax gets collected, April 1st of 2017.
It makes sense to me that this would be added to the workload of the existing ITOC. We're all broken in by now, and makes sense to me for what that's worth.
I hear you say that because the other part of this is that these meetings will be expanded to be 2-day meetings.
Well, I presume that they'll double our salaries. That's fine, thanks.
Ron Roberts told me I had a 50% raise last time I was on mine. 50%.
Zero.
Yeah, I mean,
And can somebody report back to us as there's further
Discussion.
coalescing
Sorry,
of the, what the anticipated aspect of this?
Yeah, and obviously if you guys take a look, I mean, it's posted, it's on our board agenda, they're gonna be talking about it this Friday, and we have it also at the board business meeting on May 27th. So there is time, the first reading of the ordinance, as Rob mentioned, would be in June. So clearly, if there's any, members, if there are any comments that you wanna convey, we're happy to pass that along to the board.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.
And then next, let Elizabeth to talk about the Transnet Story Map.
I'll be looking at the screen, I'm gonna skip the side, so you don't want to look at the back of my head. Good morning, my name is Elizabeth Cox. I'm the Marketing Communications Manager here at Sandag. I've been here for 4 years. It's not my first time presenting to this body, but several new faces since the last time I was here, so it's good to see you. So I will be presenting the Transnet Story Map to you today. I'm going to ask Michael to dim the lights at the front of the room since the primary focus of my talk is actually on the screen. But as we prepared to conduct the funding measure outreach that Rob just highlighted for you, we saw an opportunity to look back and tell the story of what Transnet has helped accomplish for our region over the last quarter century. So the story map that you'll see today is the tool that resulted from that effort, and as you'll see, as Ray mentioned, we've accomplished a lot with Transnet's help. More than 650 projects have been completed to date, and more are on the way. So we created a short video to introduce the story map, which we'd like to play for you now, and this, again, highlighting all the successes of Transnet. So I will hit play. Thank you.
San Diegans are always on the move, and with nearly 1 million more people expected in the coming decades, we've planned carefully for our future. For more than 25 years, Sandag has administered the Transnet half-cent sales tax for transportation. Every time you shop, dine, or play in the region, your tax dollars contribute to keeping San Diego moving. Our regional transportation network is a comprehensive system that relies on several individual pieces for the best transportation choices. Your tax dollars have powered completion of more than 650 projects totaling more than $13.7 billion. These improvements help ease your commute, provide walkable communities, and places to enjoy in your free time. More than 400 lane miles of highway improvements have eased traffic congestion and served transit, carpools, and van pools, including extension of State Route 52 in Santee, toll reductions to make South Bay Expressway more accessible, and completion of the I-15 express lanes.
I-15 express lanes are great for us because we're able to get in, whether it's fast track or with the girls, and do a carpool, then it's wonderful.
More than 20 transit projects, including launching new rapid services along Interstate 15 and in the Mid-City area, and system-wide improvements to the orange and blue trolley lines that move thousands of riders every day.
With the buses and the trolleys, as big as San Diego is, there's nowhere you can't go.
Bike projects like the Inland Rail Trail to the north and the Bayshore Bikeway in South County.
I think this is a great multi-use path and great for the commute. Get away from the cars. It's nice.
And public acquisition of more than 6,000 acres of land to protect open space.
I like open space because it allows my family to hike and go to the lake and spend time outside.
Dozens of grant projects have also received funding, like the Lemon Grove Trolley Plaza and downtown La Mesa Village streetscape projects, or the new sidewalk in front of the Vista Boys and Girls Club, and bike parking facilities in Del Mar. Hundreds of local street and road projects have repaired potholes, widened streets, and built sidewalks. With your support, Transnet delivered on promises made to voters, and Sandag has successfully leveraged Transnet dollars to obtain federal and state funds to complete projects ahead of schedule. This story map shows how every dollar in Transnet funds has effectively been quadrupled by leveraging funds from other sources. From the beaches to the mountains, from our bustling downtown and international border to our unique communities and welcoming neighborhoods, Transnet has accomplished a lot over the last quarter century, and there are more improvements on the way. Please visit keepsandiegomoving.com/Transnet to explore this interactive story map and learn how your Transnet tax dollars keep San Diego moving.
So that was the video that introduces the story map. Now we can take a closer look at the actual interactive story map. So across the top of the page, there are different tabs for the project categories that are featured here. And I apologize if you can't see in the back of the room, it's even a little hard for me up front. We have highways, transit, bikeways, local streets and roads projects, environmental acquisitions, and grant projects and programs. And the text on the left side of the page describes the Transnet half-cent sales tax, and again highlights that more than $3.3 billion in Transnet funds were used to help leverage more than $10 million in funds from federal, state, and other local funding sources. So again, every dollar basically that we've spent on Transnet projects has helped bring in $3 from those other funding sources. The map on the right side of the page has a variety of icons that correspond to the tabs that I mentioned earlier, all those project categories, and you can reorient the map by clicking and dragging or using the zoom in and out buttons up here at the top. As you click on a line or an icon, a pop-up box will appear to describe the project, its cost, the distance or the area that it covers, and the year that it was completed. So for example, State Route 52, not far south enough, 52 here has 3 different segments that were completed over 8.5 miles, and that was completed 3 different periods up through 2011. And if we look further to the north, the Lake Hodges Bikeway and Pedestrian Bridge was completed in 2009. It spans 990 feet and was completed at a cost of $9.5 million. So as we look up to the top of the page, we can move to the Transit tab. And as this loads, I'll let you know that the first slide that you'll see on any of these interior tabs provide a description of the projects that were funded with Transnet's help. So for example, we've highlighted here how trolley ridership has increased over the years. When the Blue Line trolley began service in 1981, it carried 3.6 million riders a year. Today it carries more than 16 million riders. And across the bottom of the page, there's a photo carousel, and you can either click on the carousel here or use the red arrow to the right to navigate through. And there's some great photos and project descriptions here. So for example, the Sprinter that is 22 miles and was completed in 2008 now carries 2.5 million riders per year. Or the Sabre Springs Transit Station, and you can click to enlarge the photo if you'd like. This features 630 parking spots, electric vehicle charging stations, designated parking for clean air vehicles, and van pools. Some of the projects also include a testimonial, and so that immediately follows the project photo. And here, for example, Pete, who's a van pooler, is sharing his love for the Sabre Springs Transit Station, the cover that it provides his vehicle from weather, and the easy in and out access through the HOV lanes. So as you move forward through the photos, you'll notice that the map at the right moves along with you to show where the project is located. So next, let's take a look at the Local Streets tab. So you mentioned, Rob did earlier, the local street funds that are distributed to the jurisdictions. More than $1.5 billion has been distributed to local jurisdictions to date to complete hundreds of projects. And that's been very successful. There's a couple of them that I'd like to highlight for you. This is just a sampling of what's been done. There's actually more than 200 local street and road projects, and we're in the process of compiling and gathering that information from the cities. So for example, the Santa Fe Drive Congestion Relief Project that built the first roundabout in the city of Encinitas. This has helped improve traffic flow and improve bicycle and pedestrian safety as well. In Poway, they use Transnet funds for their annual street maintenance program. So for example, here they've resurfaced Garden Road. And in Coronado, they have used the funds for their annual drainage improvements. 6th Street and Orange Avenue is featured here. There were some drainage deficiencies that were helped to be improved through catch basins. So story maps are not new to Sandag. It's something that we've used before to highlight individual projects and programs, and that made it easier for us to incorporate project information into the story map. For example, the Environmental Mitigation Program had its own story map that we were able to pull information here. And so you'll see that the EMP program has helped conserve more than 6,500 acres to date, which is the equivalent of more than 5 times the size of Balboa Park. One of the projects here, we actually have before and after photos. Here it is, the Troy Pines Restoration Project. And so there were some disturbed wetlands that were helped to be restored. Here's the before on the left and the after on the right. And so this project helped that area. And then moving to the grants tab, you'll see that our Smart Growth Incentive Program, again, they had their own story map. We matched up information from the Active Transportation Grant Program and the Senior Mini Grant Programs to highlight the more than 125 grant programs that have been completed or are underway with the help of Transnet funding. And there's some great photos in here. I'll show you a couple of my favorites. The Seniors on the Go program, this one's always popular. These seniors are getting out and about and having a great time, improving their mobility. This is the On the Go program that serves seniors in Poway, La Mesa, and parts of San Diego. The 8th Street Smart Growth Corridor Revitalization Project in National City. Or the 3rd Avenue Streetscape Implementation Project in Chula Vista. So there's a lot to see here. I hope you'll take an opportunity to scroll through and experience that. I'll get back to the overview tab and pause this video as I wrap up. So since we launched the story map in December, we've had more than 5,500 unique visitors. Folks are coming back. They're spending a little bit of time navigating through here, learning what's on here. And we intend to continue to add to this resource in the coming months and years as SANDAC continues to complete more projects with the help of Transnet funding. It is located at keepsanDiegoMoving.com/Transnet, and we hope that you'll share this resource with your friends and neighbors so that they can see where their tax dollars are being put to work around the region. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Very nice job.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Before you close the meeting, could I raise one quick issue? I guess Jose, and Elizabeth, it involves what I just heard. SANDAG is well known and responsible for population projections. And I think that began by saying we're going to have 1 million more people here in the next decade. And I've heard 1 million more by 2030, which makes sense, fine. This EDC document that was just handed out, it says that today we have 3.23 million, and in 2050, we're going to have 4.07 million. Now that's only about 700,000 more people, and by 2050. So whoever produced this document, I think, should be brought up to, I'd suggest that it's inconsistent with what I've been hearing from SANDAG and with what I heard from Elizabeth just now. So you may want to talk to the person that produced this document just to correct the inconsistency or to understand it better. Did you see it there, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I got a copy of this for the first time.
Right.
I was looking to see where they were sourcing.
And it says the region will go up by 2000. Well, that's not the million that we're talking about in the next 10 years.
No, it was the most recent forecast. It was approximately 1 million by 2050. So
By 20 what?
Yeah, by 2050. Earlier plans had showed it was a sort of faster growth rate, but the last couple of forecasts have seen a slowing of the growth rate. And so generally now, like our last regional plan, it's about, which was done in, the board adopted last year in the planning numbers, it's about 1 million folks by 2050.
By 2050.
Yeah,
Well, I don't think that's what Elizabeth's, didn't you say by,
I didn't say that. I'd have to replay
didn't
the
you
video.
say 1 million in the next decade?
It may have been. I'd have to replay the video I'll fact check that for you.
Thank you, then. All right. That's all I have.
Then our last piece of business is just to confirm our meeting, next meeting for June 8th. Do a preliminary view as to people. Is there anybody who knows that they can't? Okay. Unless there's nothing else, I guess we're adjourned.
This didn't beat your other record.